Rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But bomb.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. Coming up tonight, the fallout from the Hugh Edwards saga continues. People saying today that The Sun should never have published that story. Let me ask you this, do you actually even care? Is it just the media just kind of continuing this story for their own ends? Your thoughts on that, please? After all, there is many other things going on in this country, not least the fact that the peer review body's recommendations will be followed. So many people in the public sector getting a pay release between 5 and 7%. What do you reckon? Is that fair, or is it not enough or too much? Also, as well, the battle to save RAF Scampton continues. You've had people out on the streets protesting about Stadley Park being used for migrants. It's got me thinking, who gets to decide when it comes to the mass placement of migrants in a local area? Should it be the local council, or should they absolutely be overtaken by national government's interest. Your thoughts on that? And do you think there should ever be a time when state censorship is allowed? I ask because you've seen what's going on in France, haven't you? Or perhaps you haven't, because often it doesn't get covered. But for a long time, protests and riots were happening in the streets. Now, they want to explore basically shutting down social media in certain circumstances when things like that are happening. Slippery slope, ladies and gents, if you ask me. And let's talk foreign aid, shall we? Do you think we should be giving rich countries, i.e. China, money? I do not. What says you? We've got it all to come and more. But before we do, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has set out pay increases for millions of public sector workers. Police and prison officers will receive an increase of 7%, while teachers will get 6.5%. Teachers' unions say the new pay recommendations will allow them to call off strike action. Rishi Sunak has told those still striking to do the right thing and know when to say yes, and warns there'll be no more negotiating. While Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has ruled out increasing taxes or borrowing to fund the pay rises.
We want to pay them fairly, which is why we've taken the decision to accept the independent pay review body recommendations. But at the same time, the reason that many of them are angry, the reason that we've had strikes, is because they've seen their take-home pay eroded by inflation. And it's vital that we don't do anything in accepting these awards that fuels inflation and means we're having the same disputes this time next year.
Well, junior doctors will continue striking tomorrow as the 6% offer to the British Medical Association falls well below the 35% rise the union is calling for. It's part of a 5-day walkout in what's being described as the longest in the history of the NHS. The row has already led to thousands of cancelled operations and consultations. In other news this evening, the government has been given the go-ahead to take a legal battle over its Rwanda deportation policy to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister has said he fundamentally disagreed with the Court of Appeal's ruling the deal was unlawful. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been battling to get the policy off the ground after it was previously blocked by appeal judges. The deal would see asylum seekers deported to the East African nation. Mental health charity Mind says people like Hugh Edwards experiencing serious mental health problems should be given the space to receive treatment. Questions have been raised regarding the Sun newspaper's conduct, as well as the BBC's response to the allegations he paid a young person for sexually explicit images. The corporation's Director General will be questioned in Parliament next week on how the story was handled. The Met Police has found no evidence of criminality. Well, GB News has been speaking to people around the country to get their thoughts.
Obviously got serious mental health issues, and at the moment we don't consider the ramifications for his family.
He's going to disappear into the wilderness. That's all. He's finished, isn't he? Really, basically, he's finished. Like Schofield, he's finished.
I think people need to leave him alone. Mental health is so severe, and each person handles it a different way. Allegations and rumours cause traumatic behaviour, which is probably what's made him completely go off the edge.
The US president says President Putin has already lost the war in Ukraine. Speaking in Helsinki, Joe Biden said Ukraine will join NATO and Mr. Putin will eventually decide it is not in the interest of Russia to continue its invasion. But he reiterated that no one can join NATO while a war is ongoing.
No one can join NATO while a war is going on, where a NATO nation is being attacked, because that guarantees that we're in a war, and we're in a third world war. So that it's not about whether or not they should or shouldn't join, it's about when they can join, and they will join NATO. The issue of whether or not this is going to keep Putin from continuing to fight, the answer is Putin's already lost the war.
Footballer Dele Alli has revealed he was sexually abused when he was 6 years old and was dealing drugs by the time he was 8. Speaking to Gary Neville on his podcast, The Overlap, the Everton midfielder says he recently spent 6 weeks in rehab because of a sleeping pill addiction and mental health issues. He's also revealed he smoked at 7 years old and was sent to Africa to learn discipline. Well, the Prince of Wales has expressed his support, saying he was brave and inspirational. Ali says his adoptive parents have helped him to turn his life around.
Yeah, 12 I was adopted, so... And from then, it was like... I was adopted by an amazing family, like I said. I couldn't have asked for better people to do what they'd done for me as... I mean, I don't... If God created people, it was them.
TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that. Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside me, leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin, and the author and academic, Frank Furedi. Welcome, gents. Now, you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three here. It is very much about you guys at home. What's on your mind tonight? gbviews@gbnews.com is how you reach me on the email, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Now, I was off last night, you might have noticed if you was watching Dewbs & Co. So I missed everything unfolding. I speak, of course, about the BBC situation and the fact that Hugh Edwards was named. I mean, it made huge news yesterday, understandably so, perhaps. The fallout of it continues today. A lot of people focusing on the fact that the Sun newspaper published it in the first place. They're saying that they shouldn't have done. And I've got a couple of questions on this. First and foremost, that there's a lot of stuff going on in this world that I'm imminently about to hit onto, worry not. So I wonder, do you even care about this? And on this whole notion, I'll start with you, Frank. You know, is this news? Is it important? Do you care?
No, I don't really care. And he's just another creepy BBC presenter. So the thing that I really worry about is that we spent about 4 days obsessing about a story at a time when the world is falling apart. We have major economic issues. And for some reason, the media is so obsessed with itself that this becomes the #1 news on the BBC. The Sun's got every right to publish it, but to be honest, it's not in the public interest to continually obsess about a very creepy individual. And we don't really need to know very much about his life. We don't need to know about his condition. We just need to move on, get on with life, and really get our teeth into the big issues of our time.
We'll be doing that in a second. What do you stand on this one?
Yeah, again, I would agree with Frank there. I mean, there's been far more important things going on over the last 4 days. There's been the NATO summit. There's been the court case about Pfizer and their data. There's been Boris Johnson not handing in his phone data to the COVID inquiry. All these kind of things are far, far more important to real things going on affecting the nation and real people. But there is some public interest, of course, because this is the BBC's main presenter, and, of course, we're all forced to pay the TV licence. But on another angle, The Sun is a little bit hypocritical because they did almost exactly the same thing that they're accusing Hugh Edwards of doing in the 80s by publishing lots of topless pictures of 16-year-olds. So, you know, there's a lot of hypocrisy there in what they're doing.
You've just echoed the sentiments, literally word for word, of one of my viewers, Stuart. He says, in his view, The Sun have a cheek. And he says exactly that same point about the page 3 girls and them getting their bits out on the pages of The Sun when in some cases they were 16. So that's the views of Stuart. Let me just ask, and I do feel like I've got to be sensitive about this whole kind of mental health situation. I've had my own mental health issues. I believe that mental health issues are real and they can be very challenging and debilitating for a lot of people. But there is also a part of me that can't help but wonder, and if I'm honest, worry perhaps, that when things are happening in society, the mental health kind of sentence does come out very quickly. And I worry about whether or not we're going down a line that's almost will become an almost get out of jail free card, right? Oh, leave her alone, leave him alone, don't touch that because that person's having mental health issues. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think your instincts are right. What I really noticed is that the minute somebody's in trouble and they're about to be exposed, it's only a matter of time before you discover they have some very profound mental health issues. And it's come to the point now where we basically medicalize the mistakes that we make in life. It's no longer the case that we kind of do stupid things, there's always some kind of psychological explanation for that. And I think what we've done is, number one, we've trivialized real mental health issues. And number two, as you suggest, mental health becomes this excuse that somehow explains our own misdeeds. And therefore, I'm not surprised that in this case, Hugh Edward, we discover, has got profound mental health issues.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, people will say, well, Hugh Edwards, as mentioned previously, he's been very open and transparent about mental health challenges that he's had in the future. So this isn't, he's not saying mental health in this instance, and it's the first time anyone's heard of it, because he has, by his own admission, said that he's had a history of that. But notwithstanding that, to me, you can have a history of mental health challenges, but then also, if any crisis management team were involved in this scenario, it would be basic 101 to say, right, OK, for mental health reasons, you know, let's get that out there, and then a lot of this will go away.
The thing is, what is mental health? It's like a catch-all term. It's a nebulous term. It's become meaningless and overused. I mean, there are real mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, epilepsy, schizophrenia, all these other things. I mean, which mental health issue has he got? I mean, does he feel guilty? Does he feel depressed? Let's talk about that. But on the other hand, I look at the people who are now defending him, and a lot of this is to do with defending the reputation of the BBC as well. If it was someone on our side of the culture war, if you like, if it was a presenter in GB News, or if it was someone, you know, that had conservative views, those people who are now defending him would have no mercy whatsoever. I think they would be salivating, and they would be trying to absolutely destroy that person if they were on our side.
Well, there you go. You know what? I'm going to leave it open to you guys to have the final say on that. So GBviews at gbnews.com. But there's a lot of very important things going on in the world right now. So let's get on to one of them. Rishi Sunak, he has agreed to give public sector pay rises of about, it's between 5% and 7%. So pick the middle, I don't know, 6.5%, whatever, depending on what job you're in. He was being quite stern in his words. Let's have a little listen.
Today's offer is final. There will be no more talks on pay. We will not negotiate again on this year's settlements, and no amount of strikes will change our decision. Instead, the settlement we've reached today gives us a fair way to end the strikes, a fair deal for workers and a fair deal for the British taxpayer.
Tough talking there. Let's have a little look before we get into the debate, just about who has received what, just so you're clear. So we're talking here the police getting 7%, NHS 6%, junior doctors 6% plus £1,250 as a one-off payment. Just to expand on that a little bit as well, prison officers 7%, armed forces 5% with a £1,000 one-off pay rise, teachers 6.5%. I'll throw this open to you first, Frank. I mean, your thoughts on that? He says it's his kind of final position, end of. You can strike all you want. Do you believe that?
Not for 1 minute. I think the government is very weak. It continually gives in to pressure, and it continually insists that this is the final point, this is the point of no return. But I'm sure that when push comes to shove, they'll find ways and means of backtracking. One of the things I worry about our government is that it is just not able to hold the line on anything. And you know, I'm sympathetic to all the public sector workers, and I'm sympathetic to their desire for more money. I completely understandable in these difficult times, but we are faced with a public expenditure crisis, and the amount of public debt that we're incurring.
Yeah, but he's saying that he's not going to borrow or tax to fund this amount of pay rise. Well, so this is not going to come from additional borrowing.
Yeah, I know that. I think they're going to find different ways of magicking the money, such as charging migrants for more money when they come into this country. And I heard all this before, but I think by the time we get to this point next year, you will discover that magically the public expenditure on these pay rises hasn't been funded except by the taxpayer. And that's the dirty secret, that all the time the taxpayers are being asked to pay more and more money. And all the time what's happening is that we've completely given up on the idea that inflation ought to be controlled.
What do you make on these pay rises?
Yeah, in any other year, this would sound incredibly generous. But the problem with this year is inflation is 9.7%. So if you give the police, for example, a 7% pay rise, that's a 2.7% pay cut in real terms, and the others are worse off than that. So it sounds good as a headline figure, but if the pay rises are not keeping up with inflation, then our public sector workers are worse off. And
so do you think they should? So do you think that all pay rises in the public sector, because I've got to be honest, pay rises in the private sector don't match inflation, so why should pay rises in the public sector match it?
But most of these people are on quite low wages compared to a lot of public sector managers and so on, professionals anyway. So
I can hear my viewers, David, I can hear them. They're shouting at you right now, some of them. I can tell you now.
Maybe they are.
What they'll be shouting,
I'm on dangerous territory.
What they'll be shouting is they'll be saying, you know what, a lot of people in the public sector, they do earn reasonable wages, and a lot of the pensions within the public sector are very generous compared to a lot of people in the private sector. So why do you believe that public sector pay rises should match inflation?
It's just a case of that, their pay is actually, I'm just making the point that their pay is actually going down in real terms. It's a difficult situation.
But most people's are. A lot of people's public and private.
It's a difficult situation at the moment because in terms of the national finances, we're in an absolute state because this government and the government before them have been completely irresponsible with the national finances. We've had 25 years of them borrowing to spend money that is wasted on so many different things. I mean, you have HS2, you have migrant hotels, you have foreign aid, you have the furlough from the lockdown scheme, you have net zero, you have tens of billions of pounds every year being wasted. Surely some of those things can be cut, and then we can actually give a good wage to perhaps the police and the teachers and the nurses on the lowest wages, on the lowest wage bands, because we need to do that actually to retain them in their positions. So I'm just making the point for those people. As someone who was a teacher myself, I do understand how this comes around.
The majority of the teachers' unions have said that they'll be advising their members to accept this because they think it's a very generous offer. Do you think it's a very generous offer?
I think it's a very generous offer. As it happens, I agree with David. I think that the wage rises in this area is the least of our problem because we wasted so much money on other things. I mean, when you think about the billions we wasted during COVID, the amount of money that we all the debts we incurred during the lockdown, when you think about the way in which we're kind of wasting money on migrants, hotels, on all kinds of overseas development.
Well, you've teed up a couple of my topics nicely for the rest of my programme, Frank, because you speak about wasting money and all the rest. And for the record, by the way, I would like everyone to have an inflation-busting pay rise. I think everyone should have a fantastic standard of living, but I also do think that there's a balance to be struck when we're in the difficult economic times that we are in. What do you make to it all? And he teed up nicely there about migrant hotels. Any second, well, a couple of minutes' time, I'll be going live to RAF Scampton, where they're in a legal battle as to whether or not thousands of migrants should be placed there or not.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside my leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin, and the author and academic Frank Furedi. Now, you might be hearing quite a lot about RAF Scampton in the news. It's been there for a few weeks, months now, and it's not going away any time soon. This is all because it is, of course, earmarked for thousands of migrants to be placed there. Let's cross live to our GB News reporter, Will Hollis. He's there on the scene as we speak. Will, bring my viewers up to speed with the latest goings on, if you will.
Yes, well, all of this afternoon there's been groups of people that live in the local area around RAF Scampton, as well as in Lincoln, which is about 10 minutes away, along the very busy and noisy A15. And those people have been down here pretty much every day since March, when the decision was made, when it was brought up in the Houses of Commons. You might remember Robert Jenrick, the Immigrations Minister, announcing that the way that they were going to try and tackle the migrant crisis was by taking thousands of asylum seekers and putting them at old airfields and RAF bases. Now, the two that are really in question, the most famous is, of course, RAF Scampton, where, of course, the Dam Busters flew that famous mission on. And then the second is at RAF Wethersfield, which is in Essex. Now, what's been happening today is a permissions hearing. That's at the High Court, which is about 158 miles away down in London. So while this might be where the community is affected, the decision is made down at the courts. Essentially what that permissions hearing is it's the council's lawyers, and they've been arguing that the piece of planning permission, the piece of planning legislation that the government and the Home Office are using is being misused. Essentially, it's a piece of planning legislation that means that old places, abandoned places, can be used by the government when it's an emergency. They're arguing because this is a permanent problem, the migrant crisis, that this doesn't count as an emergency. So the court will be making that decision tomorrow at 11 a.m. whether what they've heard is convincing, but that is only a stepping stone onto the main event, as you might like to call it, because that's when they might get this judicial review, and that's when the full body of evidence will be presented at the High Court, and that could be still quite some time until we see that judicial review, if they are granted it tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Interesting stuff. Will Hollis, thank you for that update. See, one of the things that Will said there kind of really resonated with me when he's saying about, you know, you've got these courts in London deciding the fate of this facility up north. And that, for me, is a really key point, because it's at what point does the national interests, if you want, supersede the views of the local councils and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I think everyone around the country and everyone who's got one of these things happening near them, whether it's an RAF base or a hotel, doesn't want it. So we're unanimous as a nation. Wherever you go, whether it's here in Lincolnshire, Llanelli, there's one in Essex, there's the prison that's being turned into a refugee centre in Bexhill in East Sussex. Nobody wants it. So I think the High Court needs to recognise that. There's a unanimity here of people saying enough is enough. The government needs to get a grip of the actual issue, which is to stop letting illegal military-age men into the country across the border from France, across the water, across the channel from France.
I'll come back to you on a sec on that, but Frank, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think the issue here is national interest versus local interest, because it's not in the national interest to allow the institutionalization of illegal immigration. And I think what these policies do is they give you a fait accompli, which basically say that illegal immigration is here to stay, and we're going to just dump the problem on local communities all over the country. And it seems to me that what we should be talking about is not whether or not this particular local community has the right to stand up for its own interest, but whether the nation as a whole ought not to stand firmer and demand that this flow of immigration should be stopped, and that the government should basically stop playing this game of just giving up the very idea of control.
There'll be some people, you say the nation should stand together, there'll be some people in this country that are absolutely fine with this and don't think this is a problem at all, that actually think we should be doing more to help people across the channel. Of
course, yeah, obviously, if you live in Islington and you believe that this is the best thing to have happened to Britain, since the National Health Service, you're going to have a very casual and promiscuous attitude towards illegal immigration.
But your family came here as migrants, and, you're an upstanding man, and I'm noticing that you say, military-age men and all the rest of it, and people will get anxious about that. And, so some people will push back and say this demonisation of these people isn't right.
Well, the point is, I always presume in favour of migrants. I think migration is not a bad thing. The world has benefited from that. But there's a fundamental distinction between migration and migrants and illegal migrants. And I think what has happened is that we've eroded that distinction altogether. Everybody becomes legal. Nobody is any longer illegal. And we have a situation where this week, the Today program, day after day after day, is interviewing people who are planning to come here illegally. And they're interviewing them in the way that, you wouldn't interview burglars and say, why are you going to burglar this house? They're treating these people as if they have every right to come over here, and almost encouraging them, forgetting the fact that we're talking about people who are essentially breaking the law. And law-breaking, when that becomes acceptable in our society, means the end of national security.
But then we say that this is illegal and all the rest of it, but ultimately a lot of these people, their asylum claims will be rubber-stamped and passed.
Yeah, they will be. I mean, the thing is, we're in the UN Refugee Convention, and that is... it can be taken two ways, because there is a clause in there that says if you come into a country, enter a country illegally, and then claim asylum, then you have to be treated like a citizen. I mean, this goes back to that convention from 1951, but we were in a totally different world there. I mean, that was mainly to help people coming from the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe escaping to the West. There was no question of people from Africa and the Middle East coming en masse to Western Europe in those days. But now we have a different situation. We need to get out of these treaties so that we can actually control our borders, as we need to do in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? If anyone is in, true jeopardy, where, you are going to be tortured or whatever, especially when you've helped this country, then fair enough. But I just cannot get my head around why anybody would think that amassing 2,000 men in one area is not asking for trouble. I can't get my head around it. And if anyone doesn't actually know a place like Scampton and stuff very well, you've got schools very, very close to this proximity. It beggars belief, and I say this often, but I do feel that sometimes this world is going mad, if not gone mad quite some time ago, some might say. I want to talk to you about something that I think is a very important topic, which is state censorship. Should it ever be OK for a country to switch off social media because it doesn't like what is being said on there? Your thoughts?
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a slightly less unsettled day through Thursday, but things are becoming more unsettled as we go towards Friday, with this area of low pressure pushing up towards the UK as we go through tonight and into Friday. So looking at the detail for this evening then, some clear spells for eastern areas at first, but cloud will start to push in from the west as we go into the start of Friday, as well as some pretty heavy rain, especially for southwestern areas. And with this, combined with some stronger winds, temperatures will be staying around the low teens for tonight. As we go through Friday, a pretty wet and windy day to come with a yellow wind warning in force for parts of southwest England and Wales. Heavy rain as well, pushing northeastwards throughout the day. Driest for longest across northeastern parts of Scotland. But with all that cloud and those strong winds around, temperatures will be feeling pretty low for the time of year, so highs of around 22 in the southeast. Now that rain will clear to the north of Scotland through the start of Saturday, but swiftly followed by some heavy showers and thunderstorms, as well as further strong winds, but this time for central, southern and eastern parts of England. And remaining unsettled as we go through the second half of the weekend and into the start of the new week, with temperatures at or below average.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess I've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Alongside me, the leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin, and the author and academic, Frank Furedi. Now, I've got to say, I found this next story quite concerning because whether you are an avid social media user or not, the very notion to me that a government could basically just shut down entire social media platforms if they don't agree with what is going on should be very problematic to us all. This has all kind of come, the initial peg for this is the fact that you may be aware, you may not, that over in France, you know, so many places in France have basically been on fire. They were on fire for quite a few weeks because of a riot that started from a protest, that started from someone being shot by a police officer. Anyway, there's been a suggestion floated around now in France that actually, if people are trying to talk about rioting, Frank, they're communicating on social media, they're going to ask the social media platforms to take it down. If they don't take it down, they're going to look at fining them. And then they want the power, they want to explore having the power to shut down the whole social media platforms. What do you make to that?
Well, actually, the situation is even worse than that because Thierry Breton, the man who made this proposal, is also a European Union commissioner, and he's put forward a proposal that forces all the big social media companies to go along with this. So it basically means that regardless of what we here in Britain want to do, and regardless of what the policies of the British government are, the EU is putting pressure on these technology companies to institutionalize censorship on a regular basis. So this is now becoming a normal policy, and the fact is that what they're worried about is not just simply what people do in the middle of a riot. What they're really worried about is any news that, in a sense, threatens their political outlook on the world. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but the American government, the Australian government, the Canadian government, our own British government, but especially the European Union, is now putting forward proposals that would, in effect, control communication and would basically undermine the very essence of free speech. So what I'm really worried about is that they're using the riots in France as a pretext
as a bit of an excuse
for basically doing what they're already doing. And this person, Thierry Breton, is one of the, basically, it is as if he comes out of Orwell's 1984. I mean, he does come across as this person that believes that if it moves, censor it. That's basically what his outlook is, and we have to be aware of this. And we have to ensure that our own government does something not to fall into line with this kind of general globalist perspective.
Yeah, see, I blame a lot. I'm like a stuck record, me, but at least I'm consistent, because I think that what happened during the COVID response, governments pushed their luck, and they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe how they were able to control and manipulate your average Joe on the street. And then I think they got carried away with themselves, thinking, well, actually, if we can do that for this and that for this, things like I will never forget, and I still can't believe that people are not outraged by it, when in Canada, if somebody donated money to the Freedom Convoy or whatever it's called, the truckers, they could freeze the bank accounts of the person that's donated the money. I will never get over the fact that there was not more outrage about that stuff. But anyway, that's why I think people have got carried away with themselves, and it's led us to the situation we find ourselves in here now.
Yeah, it's horrendous. It's tyrannical and it's totalitarian. I remember Jacinda Ardern, the former president of Prime Minister of New Zealand, saying the government will be your single source of truth. And that's what they want to be. They want to stop and censor anyone who has a differing opinion from the government line on certain things. I mean, well, I was censored. I had my social media accounts blocked and suspended for up to 2 months for, saying what I said about the injections when they came out, But
let me play devil's advocate, right, on this. So if you are a government leader and your streets are being literally set on fire, you've lost control of the situation, you're having to deploy military personnel or your harshest police force or your firefighters, whatever, to try and get law and order back in the streets, and it's going on for weeks, if not months. Wouldn't there be a part of you that would try and go, right, I've got to try and nip the communication methods in the bud to try and stop this?
Well, I mean, that's what's happening in France at the moment. But it's still wrong to censor people. This is taking away people's civil liberties in a way that they shouldn't be taken away from. I mean, social media platforms have never been censored in this way before because they're a relatively new thing. But, it's similar to governments before shutting down publications and shutting shutting down newspapers and so on and making sure that certain people can't publish things. But no, I think it's wrong. You need to catch the criminals that do these things, and if anyone is violent or incites violence or incites crime, go after the individuals, bring them before the courts, but you must not go into the route of collective punishment and removal of fundamental freedoms for everybody. That's wrong.
I mean, I've never understood people that set fire to their own neighbourhoods anyway because they're frustrated about whatever. I just think they must be a bit thick. But anyway, that aside, do you think there's ever a reason for... Because obviously you've got the Ukraine war situation, and I know that when all that was kind of taking hold, a lot of media outlets, for example, they were shut down so that there was single voices or, you know, single kind of lines or whatever you want to say that were put out. What's your thoughts on that? Is that all right?
I think there are two occasions when it's legitimate to shut down the media or control it. Number one is if you're fighting a proper military war and you have to make strategic and tactical decisions about troops movements and other things. You don't want the world to know about it. And therefore, I think under those circumstances...
What? Who would use social media or whatever, GBNews, to plan their strategic military move?
Well, if you look at the case of what's been happening in the Middle East and elsewhere, very often the people on the social media are able to track, you know, what's happening way before the mainstream media does. And the other thing is terrorism. I don't know if you recall, there was a time not so long ago when these terrorist organizations used to put these videos on social media where they were beheading people.
I definitely do remember that. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, so I've got no problems with censoring that because I think that that's not exactly something that people should be exposed to, and it's also a way of trying to prevent that kind of activity from getting out of hand. So for me, there are two extreme situations when...
So terrorism and war.
And war, yes.
Do you have any examples where you think it's OK to censor content?
I would censor the sexualisation of children. And the thing is, we've got a similar thing coming in this country with the online safety bill. And one of the rationales for doing this is to protect children from sexualising material and underage content and so on. But at the very same time, they're sending all this kind of material into schools. So again, we have absolute hypocrisy on this, where something that should be censored isn't censored. And I would make one point there about what Frank said. I absolutely agree in shutting down these things, but not the whole network.
Yeah, that for me is where it gets a little bit weird. And by the way, you mentioned there about the material that's being used in schools. One of the problems I've got with that whole topic, don't even get me started on this one, everyone, because it is almost time for the show to finish. But I have a massive issue in actually, we don't even really know half the external content that's been taught when it comes to sex education in our schools, because a lot of schools break what they call the confidentiality agreements between the external providers and the school. So a lot of parents, they don't even know what your kid's getting taught in school on that subject. It's disgusting, if you ask me. But I promise you, don't even get me started on that one. We'll be here all night. We'll have time for Nigel Farage. And also, before we finish this show, I want to talk to you about why are we, the UK, giving money, foreign aid, to rich countries such as China, 50 million last year. What's going on?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin, and the author and academic Frank Furedi keeps me company. Now, Deborah says, I usually agree with you on some things, Michelle, but on this, she thinks that censorship of some sort is needed from time to time. You're saying that in our society, various clips will only encourage people to do worse things if they already have that in their mind. Robert says, I think it's a great idea to shut down social media. Why should why should we allow the 5% of anarchists to disturb the 95% of law-abiding people? Close it all down. Interesting, but I just think it's a slippery slope. Anyway, Matthew says, don't forget, during when you had the 7/7 bombings, the government closed down mobile phones. Did they do that? I actually was near Aldgate when that happened. They couldn't use your mobile phones. We had to queue for the phone boxes to tell our loved ones was all right. But I just thought that was overwhelming the system. If the government did that, I didn't realise that. You learn something new every day. But yeah, that censorship one has divided you. I say just be careful what you wish for. Although I've got to say as well, I can't stand social media often. I'm not sure if it's made this country, society more generally, better or worse. I don't know. I'll leave you to ponder that one. Let's talk foreign aid, though, because, it does come under the scrutiny and the microscope often, doesn't it? And there's a big debate about foreign aid and whether or not it should even be a thing. It caught my eye, David, because we gave China almost £50 million last year. Admittedly, that's lower than previous years, but still, I can't get my head around why we're giving rich countries foreign aid.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. China can totally look after itself. It doesn't need any of our money. I mean, I know they say they've cut it now and they're going to cut it by 95% over the next couple of years, which is a good thing, because I don't think we should be giving any money to a country like China. Another one is Pakistan. We give that's our second largest foreign aid recipient. I think Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Why are we giving money to a country that has a nuclear weapons program? Afghanistan is the #1 country we give money to. I'm not sure whether that goes to the Taliban. I think it does go to the resettlement schemes for Afghans. I mean, so that's another issue that ties in with migration as well. But I mean, what I think actually is we shouldn't be giving any foreign aid apart from disaster and emergency relief. So cut the $10.5 billion that we give at the moment down to about $3 billion a year.
So you would only do reactive support, you wouldn't try and do any preventative? Because by giving money in the first place, you're trying to develop countries so that when they are in crises and all the rest of it, their impact would perhaps be lessened.
It doesn't really go to things that people expect it to go on, like water and food and things like this. It goes into wind farms and solar farms. And actually, what shocked me, over the last 5-year period, £350 million was given to abortion providers, Mary Stopes International and Planned Parenthood Foundation, to carry out abortions in in Africa and other places, I think that's a terrible use of our money. We shouldn't be funding that.
Well, people will disagree, but all different opinions valid. Frank, your thoughts?
Well, this actually gives a new meaning to a Chinese takeaway. In a sense.
You've been waiting all night to tell that gag, haven't you? You've been sitting on desperate to get to the foreign aid story.
I've written this down 3 times, not to forget. Look, the thing is that foreign aid has got a certain purpose to it. In the case of China, it's an attempt to forge certain cultural ties and cultural links, and it's money given to higher education. I think it's wrong to do it. I think it's unnecessary to give money to China. I also think that we need to have a more nuanced approach towards foreign aid. It has to be principally reactive, but now and again there's a case for helping certain countries deal with a specific problem. But the real problem with foreign aid is it doesn't work. The people that get the money are often the wrong people. They often encourage corruption. In the case of Africa, for example, very often foreign aid becomes a medium for corrupting the local communities. And I spent 1.5 years in Africa when I was younger doing my PhD there. And I noticed that foreign aid becomes this gravy train that people use for their own personal advantage. So I've become very skeptical of foreign aid as a tool to ameliorate society or to develop society. And instead what we should be doing is targeting specific problems, especially of those countries that we think are important to us. They are important for our security. They kind of reflect our national interest, instead of having this very crazy notion that we're somehow gods who are going to help the world by throwing money at it.
One of my viewers, Rob, says, am I hearing things? Are you seriously telling me that we've given China 50 billion in foreign aid? No, 50 million with an M, not a B. He says he was feeling like he has to go lie down. Don't go lie down. It's all right. It's an M, a million, not a billion. But notwithstanding that, the point is, should we be giving a rich country anything? One of the challenges, well, what I would call one of the stupidities, not a challenge, one of the stupidities with the foreign aid budget is a legally enshrined in law spend target, and you have to spend, I think it's 0.5% of GNI now. And if you create a spend like an enforced spend target, what you're going to have is you're going to have it all the time anyway, but certainly towards year end, you're going to have all these people going, oh no, I've still got to spend X amount, I've got to spend X amount. So then you start littering almost confetti-like this money for no other reason other than to tick this box and say, I hit my spend target. That then plays into your concern, which is whether or not it's been effective. And I would wonder whether or not we even do checks and balances to look at whether or not the money that we are spending is used effectively, because I would say that those checks and balances are lacking. David says that he feels that foreign aid is madness. Do you think that there's an argument, though, at all, that actually if you are a wealthier country, even though relatively people here might say, well, we're having it tough and all the rest of it, but in comparison to some of the other places, China not being one of them, I have to say, then there could be an argument to help those less fortunate. John says he's been saying for years that the foreign aid policy is ludicrous. He agrees with you that you should only really, or we should be looking more to focus on the immediate aftermath of disasters and all the rest of it. Steve says in his mind he feels that it's a rich country's way of essentially bribing other countries. But then he says, he asked, maybe is he being cynical? Andy, he says that countries treat our country like a money box. And you see, this is the sad thing, because I'm sure that some foreign aid is gratefully received and does go to causes that need it and actually really does make a difference, perhaps whether it's helping girls, I don't know, get educated in Afghanistan when the Taliban, if they had their way, you know, they'd do everything possible to stop it. So I don't doubt that actually some foreign aid really does make a difference, but there are certainly questions to be asked about how it's administered and whether or not it should be a spend target. Also, lots of you getting in touch about the situation in Scampton and hotels and places like that. Lots of people are saying that if you don't put them in these big military bases, then where do you put them? Well, I don't know, you'd have to kind of disperse people around. I think when you're asking people in their thousands to congregate in one area, I don't understand how that is ever going to end well. If I'm missing something, I'm sure that you will tell me. Lots of people getting in touch saying that they've enjoyed the conversation from you guys tonight, so thanking you for that. But look, that is all we've got time for. Time flies, doesn't it? But Frank, thank you very much for your comments and insight. David, the same to you. And thank you as well for your thoughts and contribution too. If you've just joined us, you've missed the conversation, what are you doing? You've missed out, but worry not, because you can go online, you can watch us back on YouTube or our app. And if you're going out, Nigel's next. And if you do need to go out, take us with you on your radio, wherever you are there. Have a fantastic evening. And as always, we thank you for watching and supporting GB News. I'll see you tomorrow.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a slightly less unsettled day through Thursday, but things are becoming more unsettled as we go towards Friday, with this area of low pressure pushing up towards the UK as we go through tonight and into Friday. So looking at the detail for this evening then, some clear spells for eastern areas at first, but cloud will start to push in from the west as we go into the start of Friday, as well as some pretty heavy rain, especially for southwestern areas. And with this, combined with some stronger winds, temperatures will be staying around the low teens for tonight. As we go through Friday, a pretty wet and windy day to come with a yellow wind warning in force for parts of southwest England and Wales. Heavy rain as well, pushing northeastwards throughout the day. Driest for longest across northeastern parts of Scotland. But with all that cloud and those strong winds around, temperatures will be feeling pretty low for the time of year, so highs of around 22 in the southeast. Now that rain will clear to the north of Scotland through the start of Saturday, but swiftly followed by some heavy showers and thunderstorms